Welcome to the Zero Line, produced by Resolute Square. I'm Sergeant Sarah Ashton-Cirillo of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, and every week we'll be bringing you inside Ukraine's war for liberty and liberation against the Russian enemy, while explaining how a victory by us on the battlefield isn't just vital for the Ukrainian people, but for the world as a whole. We will push back against the lies regarding this war for freedom and take you straight to the front lines of the fight for democracy.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of ZeroLine. I'm Lisa Senecal, Executive Editor of Resolute Square, and I am here with Sarah Ashton-Cirillo. We also have a special guest today. Very, very pleased to welcome Romeo Kokriatski to the show. Romeo is the managing editor at New Voice Ukraine. He's a co-host of Hype Ukraine. Please check both of those out.
Ukraine without hype. Ukraine without hype.
I'm sorry, Ukraine without hype. I'm looking at your follow them at Twitter at Hype Ukraine. And Romeo, you are at straightforward your name at Romeo Kokriatski. And we'll make sure that both of those links are available to you. Romeo, thank you so much for being here.
I'm very happy to be here. Thanks for inviting me on.
You know, Romeo brought up a great point yesterday, and it was something that you and I have addressed, Lisa, for the audience. More Ukrainian voices should be heard. And we had Alexander Musienko on. He was supposed to be on again this week. We've been trying to create this outreach. And Romeo, on his Twitter feed, rightfully so, chastised, in a sense, Western media for ignoring Ukrainian voices in order to maybe plug their own agendas or their own brands. And when I saw that post and knew that Alexander couldn't make it, I immediately thought to reach out to Romeo, especially because his knowledge of Ukraine, knowledge of the media sector. And Romeo, if you don't mind this being the first question, what prompted that tweet? And what have you seen with the amount of time you've been in Ukraine, with your family being Ukrainian, your wife, etc.? Why do you think Ukrainians are being ignored 2 years into this full-scale invasion?
Well, to talk about why I tweeted that in the first place, I was just scrolling and I saw this ad. Submit your questions for our podcast, and it was 3 hosts standing in front of their logo, Ukraine, something or the other. And I was wondering, what would I ask? And then I was wondering, who are these guys? Well, I've never heard of them. You know, like, I've been working as a journalist in Ukraine for the past decade. It's a pretty small crowd. We mostly all know each other, and I'm like, who are these guys? How come I've never heard of them? So I looked them up, and it's just 3 like British guys, no connection to Ukraine as far as I can tell, beyond the vague descriptor of they are journalists. And I thought to myself, surely it's not that hard to find at least one person. I mean, there are complexities in pretty much any situation that you will not understand. A third party will not understand unless someone with personal experience explains it to them, right? And especially when it comes to war that goes double or even triple. There are nuances, there are political questions and so on that are not completely clear unless you are from there, unless you have experience there. And I was wondering to myself, is it really that hard? I know personally 3 Ukrainian journalists in London right now. Would it really be that difficult to find one of their contacts and be like, hey, we're doing a Ukraine news podcast, do you want to be a host? It doesn't seem like it's that hard. And as for why it's being ignored, well, I mean, that's really simple. The world is not that interested in Ukraine. The world is not interested in our defense against Russian fascism. We can see that clearly through the lack of military aid that we get, the slowness of aid when we do get it, the hand-wringing of, whether we should support them or not. Oh, don't you know they're all correct? It's just obvious 2 years on that Ukraine is just not that interesting. So if you are a reporter who wants to make a name for yourself and you don't really care about one or the other conflict, it's an easy way to gain relevance. Because for whatever reason, people don't want to listen to Ukrainians, but they'll happily listen to Western journalists explain Ukraine to them, despite the fact that these Western journalists have maybe at best a year or two of experience in the country and not, an entire career, like every single Ukrainian journalist.
Yeah, it's incredibly important. We really appreciate your voice here also in your publication, which is doing some really phenomenal work, and it is work on the ground that we are not getting enough of. Why do you think it is so difficult to get people in the West in particular? You mentioned that getting the funding is so much harder than it should be. Why do you think it's so difficult to get people in the West to understand that this is not just a Ukrainian issue? This is a world stability issue. This is a democracy issue. This does directly affect people in throughout Europe and in the States.
Most people aren't used to forecasting their political decisions any more than a couple of months out. I mean, look at any public polling taken in the pre-US campaign election season, and you'll see that people all of a sudden will really start caring about the economy or about border security or what have you, when that was barely a topic, because it comes up in the news, they see the headline, they start caring. Then whatever the big thing, the election or some speech or whatever it is happens, then they go back to their lives. For what is shaping up to be a pretty long running conflict here, it's, I think, almost impossible to expect people to be engaged. While it does affect them, it affects them indirectly. If you're, living in, I don't know, Maryland or Kentucky or something, you might care in the abstract about human rights and democracy and so on. But caring in the abstract doesn't translate to the sustained political pressure that you need in order to actually get legislators to vote for aid packages, as we can see, especially when, that would go even if there wasn't an enormous billions of dollars propaganda machine working against us. But when you throw that in the mix, you end up with this, where people are happy to ignore or push aside Ukraine and Ukraine's struggles in favor of their own domestic political issues.
Speaking of domestic political issues, Romeo, you or many Ukrainians would have a unique perspective, again, which is why Ukrainian voices are so important. When we, as Lisa was just mentioning, over and over at Resolute Square, whether it's in our columns, whether it's on the different podcasts with Rick Wilson or Stuart Stevens, or obviously ZeroLine with myself and Lisa, we talk about overarching themes of democracy, anti-autocracy, the need to make certain that we have these individual liberties and freedom. Can you explain a little bit, though, to the audience, especially those who haven't been paying attention lately, what's really going on in the ground with Ukrainians, specifically Ukrainian civilians, where while we're thinking of these grand themes, Ukrainians are just trying to stay alive in the face of Russian terrorism?
Yeah, it's honestly, it's a little disconcerting when I see people living in much safer countries talk about how threatened or scared they feel about whatever petty thing occurred to them or in their vicinity. And I'm like, well, that's nice, you guys, but it's not, it doesn't really matter. I don't know, maybe that's a selfish thing, but I think when you have cruise missiles coming down around your ears every other week, you're allowed to be a little selfish.
Yeah, put shit in perspective in a hurry.
Yeah, right. At the same time, and then you have the counter argument that people go, oh, well, Ukrainians clearly don't care about their own war. They're all, I don't know, sipping frappuccinos and eating croissants at cafes and something. And it's like, yeah, well, people adapt. I don't know what to tell you. When something bad happens, people adapt to that bad thing and then try to continue living because we're humans. That's almost the definition of human, is adapting to a bad situation as best you can. And it's the fact that people are unable to empathize even a little bit. It's disappointing, but it's not especially surprising.
I'm glad you mentioned the sipping Frappuccino idea, because it is such an act of defiance and resistance to continue to attempt to carry on a normal life in the face of what's happening. It is such a show of incredible strength among the Ukrainian people that they are going to carry on. Yesterday, or I guess it was the day before and reported yesterday, when Senator Ron Johnson, made this insane statement about how, we just need to deal with the fact that Putin is not going to lose and, give up that fight in Ukraine. He completely opposes the funding. And, what we really need to be doing is trying to bring Putin in and deal with him. And I had a lot of reactions to that, but one of them was, what unbelievable arrogance for an American, I don't care what your status is, to decide for the Ukrainian people that their struggle is over. Like, that is not the United States decision to make. Can you give us a sense of, on the ground, where the people in Ukraine are at? Because they're certainly not where Ron Johnson is.
I mean, no, we're not going to give up. There's no really, when I hear people, if we withdraw aid, the war will be over. Yeah, I'll be dead. The war will be over. That's because there's going to be a couple of million people that are dead. When you kill all everyone you want to kill, turns out the war is over because everyone's dead now. It's not rocket science. It's really, really annoying to consistently encounter the same argument over and over that, we shouldn't be funding foreign wars, or we shouldn't be getting involved, or it's not our problem, or what have you. Because like you said, if you forecast out, if you let a dictator set the precedent that conquering countries is fine, guess what? You don't have a peaceful world anymore. I mean, we can see whatever post-World War II peace we had is fraying at the seams. We can see China making ever more threatening territorial claims on Taiwan. Like we can see that all over the world there are these regional conflicts propping up because people feel emboldened. Bad actors feel emboldened when they aren't punished, when they don't encounter resistance, or when that resistance is token or half-hearted. They feel emboldened to act because, like any bully, if you don't push back, they just feel like they have the right and the obligation to continue harassing you.
I'm going to switch gears here for a second, Romeo and Lisa, but something that the three of us have great passion for, which is media, free speech, the fourth estate. So to plug again, you're managing editor of New Voice Ukraine, which is a part of a conglomerate that also has Ukrainian language news outlets. Resolute Square and New Voice Ukraine have something very similar in common, which is a truly deep well of columnists, though, and opinion writers, in addition to the fact that you are a news outlet. When you bring these people on, when you find these opinion writers, what have you noticed in the sense of free speech? Do they feel that they can write about, within the parameters of you being the managing editor, but do they feel they can write about whatever they need to under Ukraine in 2024, under martial law, under President Zelensky's government? Because that too is one of the areas we hear a lot of lies about, coming from the likes of Tucker Carlson, JD Vance and others, where they go ahead and they try to claim that there's a culling of free speech. What's your view on that?
I mean, I can tell you I've never once even considered the question when a columnist submits an article for me. I've never ever thought, what maybe what could be objectionable in here? Like, that's not something considered, because, well, in Ukraine we have a free press and people write whatever they want and they're happy to do it. It's one of the fundamental differences between us and Russia, is that Ukrainians are very loud. As the joke, to paraphrase the joke, you ask 3 Ukrainians their opinion, you'll get 5 different answers. It's always been a facet of kind of just Ukrainian culture in general, and the way Ukrainians see the world. We're very loud. We have very strong opinions, and we're happy to share those opinions with anyone willing to listen. There's always a line in war specifically where you want to report honest information, but at the same time, especially if you're Ukrainian, I can't speak for the many Western journalists that have ignored this little maxim, but you don't want your side to lose. I say side, this isn't a sports game. This isn't like a abstract contest. This is a life and death struggle. But you want your country to survive, right? That's kind of the whole thing. So when you're a journalist and you're writing, you do have to keep in mind, what can I write that won't impact the war in a negative sense, right? Because this isn't all-encompassing. The information domain is just as important as sea or air or land, possibly in a few aspects even more important, since we are dependent on foreign aid, and public opinion in Western democracies drives whether we get that foreign aid or not, as we can see now. So you want to present the information in a way that won't damage you, but at the same time, I wouldn't say that I've ever felt a need to censor myself. It's more like making sure that you aren't compromising anyone, making sure that you're not exposing anything that the enemy, who can also read just like you can, gains any new information, and making sure that everything you report is, as always, above board and verifiable. Of course, if you ignore those things, you can run into issues. But that's not even censorship as much as just being aware and being considerate of the fact that you are, like it or not, a participant in a war. That's what every journalist is in Ukraine, regardless of how they themselves feel about it, because that's the nature of being invaded, and that's the nature of information warfare.
Before Lisa goes to her question, I just want to tell you, I'm going to literally plagiarize that statement and bring it to Stratcom tomorrow in my meeting, and say that we need to start reminding, especially the Western journalists, that if they're on the ground there, they are here, I should say, because I'm just a few hours away from you.
There is no...
They're participants in the war.
Yeah, there's no objective side. It's like being objective. I don't know. It's like being objective towards the Nazi regime. Oh, well, Hitler did a lot of bad things. Yeah, you stop there. You don't continue that sentence. You don't say, but, however, though, but maybe you think about it. No, you just stop there. And when it comes to the struggle between authoritarianism and democracy, every member of the democratic world, every person who considers themselves a free citizen, is pretty much obligated to resist authoritarianism, because if you don't, your country's next. That's the way, the nature of these. It's the nature of totalitarianism itself. Warlords see that they can easily grab power, so more warlords are emboldened to grab more power, and on until you have something like Russia. And when you're a Western journalist reporting on Ukraine, you're not just reporting on some foreign conflict between people who speak funny over there somewhere. You're reporting on what could be the opening battle to decide whether the 21st century is going to continue developing and progressing in a way that promotes liberty, or if we're all going to go back to the medieval ages where we were all slaves to lords and nobles.
what you're saying is so important for Western journalists to grasp. It's a source of constant frustration among, folks in Resolute Square and pro-democracy people in the United States, that our media still has not caught up to the idea that there are not two equal sides. There are not two legitimate conversations to be having here, that you can do both sidesism on, whether we're talking about democracy in the United States and the threat that Donald Trump and the MAGA movement poses, or we're talking about Putin and Russia versus Ukraine. There are not two sides, two reasonable sides to these stories that both need to be told objectively, because one side is objectively wrong.
Yeah,
and
like one side's evil.
Yes, yeah.
One
You
side's
don't
just
have,
obviously the bad guys.
right.
You don't really
And
even have to think hard about it. You don't have to go, well, let's look into the nuances of their tax program or whatever. No, you just look at Russia. You look at anything a Russian politician has said ever in the past 30 years, and you'll find something objectable and evil and imperialist about it, because that's the nature of the Russian Federation.
do
No,
you
you go
feel
ahead.
as though, we certainly have a lot of Russian propaganda that makes it into the United States and then finds its way into far right-wing media, and then moves its way into more mainstream talking points. The Russians are very good at this. Do you feel as though any of that messaging seeps in effectively in Ukraine?
It may have done prior to the full-scale invasion. And there are like panics, there are paranoias that come out, but I think they would come out regardless of the propaganda. The fact is that once Putin decided to fully conquer Ukraine, every Ukrainian made a conscious choice to disassociate themselves from Russia entirely, even if they had lingering feelings or doubts or leanings towards Russia, or quote unquote the Russian world, Russian values, or whatever the hell it is. That's gone. You can't bomb a people constantly every day, raise cities to the ground, murder hundreds of thousands, and then expect your messaging to be that effective in that populace. It's just not. Even people who would be, let's say, ideologically aligned with Russia are making an effort to distance themselves as far as possible from it.
Let's jump to the military question regarding Russia at the moment. Lisa and I were just talking about one of your articles in New Voice Ukraine this morning regarding the increase, I guess, that just took effect in Russia through the Duma. It's been signed into law, pushing the age of conscripts, or sorry, not conscripts, contract soldiers to age 65, officers to age 70. For perspective, in Ukraine, age 60 is the cutoff without getting special dispensation. What does this portend?
I mean, they're running out of people. One of the biggest, I think, honestly, what we're seeing is the ongoing consequence of Putin's 3-day special military operation, where they dedicated an immense amount of their best guys, the most experienced, most well-equipped, best trained troops in landings in Hostomel and Vasilkiv, which they all just got slaughtered repeatedly until they finally decided, hey, maybe we should stop doing that. But by the time they decided, they'd run out of almost everything. I remember during the occupation of Kherson, hearing about them sending training officers from deep within Russia themselves to Kherson to maintain the occupation, because they didn't have anyone else, because everyone else was dead. Obviously, they will need to keep whoever is alive as in service as long as possible because they don't have any other options. You can't run a military if everyone who knows how anything works is dead.
I remember going during the Kharkiv counteroffensive, and in one of their infamous torture chamber areas, they also lived near one of the cities by Izum. And you were saying anybody who knows anything. And one thing that jumped out at me was there was a poster from 1974, 1975. It was in Russian, showing them how to assemble an AK-74, showing them how to apply a landmine. And it was there in the barracks, a 40-year plus or 38-year plus. I was from the 70s, so even older, almost 50 years. Sorry, 50-year-old poster showing these conscripts, or maybe they were Storm Group Z, whoever they were, the convicts, how to even assemble their rifles, which matches up with exactly what you've just told our audience here at Resolute Square today.
Yeah, we know for a fact, for example, that a Russian conscript has been shipped out after 5 days of quote-unquote training. I'm not sure how much training you can get in 5 days before being shipped out to the front lines because they need bodies. They're not very picky about what those bodies are capable of. They just need human meat to work over to hopefully waste Ukrainian firepower on that and preserve the precious lives of their officer class, which again, they don't really have a lot of anymore, except for either the very, very old and most corrupt guys that are still in Russia proper, or young guys that they had to promote way ahead of schedule because all of their older colleagues were already dead.
There is such a compelling story of Ukrainian success to be told in what you both are talking about, that we have in the United States this drumbeat of the invincibility of Vladimir Putin and Russia. This is not a strong country with a strong military. If they had a moderately strong military 2 years ago, they don't any longer, or they wouldn't be hiring as many. They now have to pay people to come from other countries to fight for them because they're running out of Russian bodies to be able to throw in front of bullets and mortars. So, God,
plus you don't have to pay bereavement benefits to families of foreign mercenaries. Saves a lot of money in the pension budget.
Right. Wow, I hadn't even considered that.
One of the main things about Russia is, however cynical and depraved they are, go 2 or 3 levels below that, and you'll reach an approximation of the Russian mindset.
Yeah, that's terrific.
Speaking of the Russian mindset,
really is.
Last week, we referenced Lisa called Tucker Carlson an ass clown. I referenced him as an enemy of humanity.